You can go now.
What? I'm good to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the last session of Books Sandwiched In for this series. My name is Ulana Fuller, and some of you know me from, I used to work here at the library, but right now I am the Executive Director of the Ontario County Historical Society. I started there in May, and I love it. So I hope you also will come to the Historical Society and see the really fabulous museum exhibit and some of our programs. But right now, here today, because I think we're all book lovers, we're here to talk about the book Letters from Yellowstone by Diane Smith. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of background information about why I even have this book. So a long time ago, I don't know, it was like 1997, I was in college, and I have a twin sister, and my sister is a geologist. And so she was applying for all these internships. And she applied for an internship with a geologist, and the trip was going to be in Yellowstone for the summer. The geologist, Dr. Lisa Morgan, she called my parents' house and offered the position to my sister. And my sister, or my mom, who took the call, said she already accepted a position in Houston, but I have another daughter. Does she have to be a geologist? And so Dr. Morgan said, no, she doesn't. Tell her to give me a call. So I called her, like right away. My mom hung up the phone, she called me, hung up the phone, I called Lisa, and 5 minutes later I had this great internship for the summer, and I was jumping up and down on my bed screaming, I'm going to Yellowstone! So it was really a fabulous summer. I started out 2 weeks in Boulder, Colorado, and I was doing some work at the USGS in Denver. And then as a group, the whole team, we went to, it was to Jackson Hole. So we were there for 2 weeks doing field work. And then we went to Yellowstone for a month. And we were camping the whole time and really mostly working in the backcountry. Lisa was, or is, a volcanologist, and she was studying the lava, I think it was Lava Creek Tuff. So it's just from one of the ancient volcanic eruptions, massive eruptions from so many million years ago in Yellowstone. And we were drilling core samples. So we had to trek with these backpacks with water canisters for the drill so that we could drill the core samples of rock to take back to the labs after the summer was over. So I had this great experience in Yellowstone, really got to see a lot of places that most people wouldn't get to see in Yellowstone, and I loved it. And then a few years later, I got this book for Christmas. And I love this book so much. I read it every year. And my daughters love this book. They read it often, and it's just a fabulous book. And I don't like it just because it reminds me of my time there. It has really well-developed and interesting characters. They're fantastic. It's also a really well proofread book, so it's one of my pet peeves. I don't like finding mistakes and typos and stuff. It has really strong imagery, strong voices, and when you get to the end, it's very satisfying. And I do feel like you should have some kind of, I like to be satisfied at the end of a book. Even if it's not what I expected, I like to be satisfied, and this is satisfying, and it's just a really fantastic book. And I understand there's only 2 copies in the library system, so how many of you did get to read this book before you come today? A couple. Okay, so you have something wonderful to look forward to. So this is an epistolary novel, so it's written in letters, and it's interesting because it's not letters back and forth, it's letters from Yellowstone, so it's the characters who are in Yellowstone, and it's only the letters that are going out from Yellowstone to various parts of the United States. So whether it's the main character's family or friend or the expedition leader's colleagues and so on. So all these letters are just from that perspective within Yellowstone. But even though you're getting them just going the one side, you still know the feelings and perspective of the recipient of the letter, because they're responding to the letters that we don't see that are coming back, which is really interesting. So you really feel like you know the whole story from both sides. You get a really good sense of the characters that aren't in the book or who aren't in Yellowstone and the characters who are. And then what's interesting is some of these characters who are having letters sent to them, some of those characters are later in the novel coming into Yellowstone, and then they start writing letters that go out. So that's really interesting. So Lester King is an example whose voice is directly added to the story after he arrives in Yellowstone. So this book, it's about a fictional expedition in Yellowstone. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit, but I thought that I would read the first letter to you so that you could get a taste of what this book is in the tone. And it's a short letter, so it won't take too long. So this is written from A.E. Bartram, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York, March 10, 1898, to Professor H.G. Merriam, the Agricultural College of the State of Montana, Bozeman, Montana. Dear Professor, Dr. Philip Aber of the Smithsonian made a presentation on campus last week in which he discussed your planned field study in Yellowstone National Park. Although I have studied medicine during my tenure here, I prefer the study of botany over anything else. I have a personal collection of over 5,000 specimens, some of which I inherited from a distant relative on my father's side, and have worked extensively on classification. For the last 3 years, I have summered in Philadelphia studying the Lewis expedition and have initiated an illustrated documentation of their collection, specializing in the Rocky Mountain species, e.g. Lupinus argenteus, Linum lewisi, Clarkia puchella, and of course, Louisia rediviva. I have found this work to be immensely satisfying, but it has, of necessity, focused on studying species out of place and time. I am indebted, as we all are, to the earliest collectors, but am equally interested in exploring the complexities of plant life in their natural environs and contributing to a scientific understanding of the plant kingdom. I am young, single, and without any engagement to confine me here. With your expressed interest, I could reach Montana by May 15th, May 30th at the latest. Please advise at your earliest convenience, as I am most anxious to make plans. Sincerely, A.E. Bartram. So this A.E. Bartram is really Alexandria, who goes by Alex. So as you can imagine, this creates a lot of misunderstanding, and they go back and forth a little bit, and it's not until Alex actually arrives in Yellowstone that they realize, oh, A.E. Bartram is a woman. And that is just, and she has no idea. She just has no idea, but it's probably a little purpose that she is not very clear, but she's ambitious, she's very adventurous and driven and determined, but she's also practical. Her work is impeccable and her reputation is as well, but she is a little bit selfish and headstrong and very set in her ideas. So she's very dedicated to a Western view of science, and this is a struggle that she is trying to work throughout the novels to even reconcile beauty and sentiment and romance as complements to her scientific views. She insists on, for example, using the scientific nomenclature for the plant species. She doesn't want it to be monkey flower, the Lewis monkey flower. It has to be Louisia rediviva. And she is just really set on that. And it's interesting because she argues back and forth with Professor Merriam about this and is always trying to ensnare him in an argument and say, see, if you only use the scientific name, we know what we're each talking about. So that's fun, but she's just a little unending at first. But she also doesn't realize that she really is a romantic and sentimental. And in another letter that she writes to her friend Jess, I think it's to Jess, yes, she says this: "You must believe me when I say that naturalizing is in my blood. I do not want to live and die a closet botanist in New York, sneaking out to the field only when it does not interfere with my real work. You, of anyone, should understand that. Besides, I want to match the best I have against the best the world has to offer before it is gone. That is what the West is all about, is it not?" So she's got these really just fanciful ideas. She's really, I think, captivated by this idea she has of the West. And to me, it's in contradiction to her kind of professed scientific rules for herself and communication in her field of study. So who are the other characters? Howard Merriam is the leader of the expedition, and really his purpose is to systematically collect, classify, and analyze the plant life of the northern Rocky Mountains. And he decides to start in Yellowstone because it has a diversity of undiscovered plant life, and it is also the nation's national park. So he decides to start there, and he's also close to it. But the plan is he has a dream to start an herbarium and research center at the agricultural college where he works. Professor Merriam, like Alice, has some contradictions embodied in his perspectives. He is really a captive of a white patriarchal society. He cannot find any fault in Alex except that she's a woman. And he just struggles. He writes to his mother, what am I gonna do with a woman? And he just cannot get over this. And it's not even, some of it is he can't accommodate her and so on, but he just cannot get this over his head. He doesn't think she has the constitution to be able to survive in these rugged conditions doing this field work, and he just cannot figure this out. And he calls the plant life undiscovered, but it's not undiscovered. There have been Native Americans living there. They know these plants. They know they have names for them. They have medicinal purposes, or they know what is edible. And even while he calls these plants undiscovered, he at the same time has employed a Native American man and his wife, and they have 2 children, to help him in his field work, identifying and learning what the uses of these plants are. So it's just interesting that he doesn't realize is harboring that contradiction. So then we have Dr. Rutherford, and he is an agricultural man, a professor at the university, and I would say that Dr. Rutherford, Alex, and Howard Merriam are really the 3 main primary characters. Dr. Rutherford, he's a broken man. He's unreliable, but he has a genius to him. And he does also like his drink too much. But he's really pretty clever, but he likes to do things his own way. And doesn't really I think he postures quite a bit, pretends he doesn't care, but he does. He's very intelligent. Also on the expedition, we have Dr. Peacock. He's an entomologist, and he just flits in and out. He's totally doing his own thing. And then there's 2 students, Rocky and Stony, so they're working with Dr. Rutherford, and they live out west. They have grown up on a ranch, their father's ranch, and so they've come on this expedition to get out of the summer ranch work. And then there's the Chinese cook, there's the driver and his dog, Joseph is the Native American man, his wife Sarah. And then there's just a host of other characters, but we've got three secondary characters that are very important to the story. And they are Miss Swinger, Mr. Wilo, and Mrs. Eversman. And this story is just really interesting because I think it's hard for us to realize how much tourism was going on at this time in the national park. So people were always exploring. Men and women were always interested in exploring the world if they were able to. And so I think this is really interesting because Miss Swinger I don't know exactly what age she is in the book, it's hard to tell, but she's unmarried, she's wealthy, she has become like a patron to other women's daughters. So she provides opportunities for them before they're going to marry and their worlds are going to close up and become much smaller. And the mothers of these young women, they send their daughters to Miss Swinger so that they can have life experiences and see beyond their contemporary circles. And Miss Swinger is a traveler. She just loves it. She likes to have new experiences and meet people and see places. So she's really fabulous. And she attempts to take Alex under her wing. And at one point, she has what is for Alex a very uncomfortable conversation about where her life is going to go. And she says, you have to make a choice. She says to Alex, you're not going to be able to have science and marriage at the same time. And she said, like in that day, she said, you have to make a choice, you have to live, you have to experience, but you have to be who you are, and so on. They have at the Yellowstone Hotel, they're having I believe it was the 4th of July celebration. She loans her a dress, and Alex is kind of a little alarmed because she thinks it's too revealing and not herself, but Miss Swinger says, just be free and enjoy being a woman, but you're also a scientist. And so it's a really interesting conversation. I don't want to say too much about it, but it gets Alex thinking a little more because I don't get the impression that she has really thought too much about where her life is going and how she's going to intentionally really direct her life. She came to this expedition because she heard a talk and this is what I want to do, I'm a botanist, I'm going to do this, but then what? She's got to start thinking beyond the summer and what she wants to do. So then there's Mr. Wilo, and Mr. Wilo is, again, an older gentleman, but I don't remember what age, but he is a poet, and quite a well-known poet, and he's in Yellowstone. And like Miss Swinger, he's also serving to enlighten Alex and give her new perspective and to help her find freedom from her rigid ideas and her constricting life and all of the expectations that are placed on her by her family and society. And then Mrs. Eversman is a widow, and she is also in Yellowstone. And she is this wonderful woman, timid. She is a bird watcher, and she is just lovely. And she spends hours and hours in the woods. She has a little shelter or tent, and she just observes the birds. And she just is very humble, and she doesn't think she's a scientist. Oh, she's just an amateur. And Alex is astounded by her observations. But these three people really do challenge Alex's ideas about what is an amateur, what is an academic, what is freedom, and what is right in the academic world. Do you have to Mr. Wilo especially is like her conscience. She has some choices in the field to make, and she knows that he's watching her and challenging her to step beyond her role as a scientist and sometimes do what's right and not just pursue science. So that's pretty interesting too. Another character is Lester King, and Lester really represents everything we want Alex to be liberated from. And he's horrified. He comes to Yellowstone and he's horrified at what he thinks Alex is becoming. But really she's always been this person. But he describes the dress she wears to this ball as blood red. And it's just too much. And then she describes this moment by the stream, and she's like dreamy and poetic. What is going on with her? Alex is now in serious danger. He wants to just snatch her away, take her back to Cornell, back to the East where it's civilized, and she'll just go back to her medical studies. And I think reading is just want Lester to go away, leave her alone. And he's beyond even her parents, because her dad is pretty excited about her going, and her mom is just doesn't understand. I don't even know where Montana is. So she's like, why can't you stay in the East? So that's funny, but Lester is really just a burden and heavy. So I was totally rooting for Alex's independence, for her development, and for her to really fully become who she can be. And you really feel that, especially when Lester's involved. And then there's Jess, and Jess is the friend that Alex writes to, but it's really as if Jess is the mirror that Alex is looking into as she struggles to figure out who she is. We don't know anything about Jess. Like, we know a lot about what Lester is like, but we never hear about Jess from any other character or writer. Interesting. But the letters to Jess are the most elaborate and detailed letters that Alex is writing to anyone. They're very personal. She's letting everything out, all her struggles, all the ways that her perspective is changing and growing. So I love the letters to Jess. They're really interesting. You really get to know Alex in those letters. And then, of course, really in this book, like, everything and everyone are just butting up against each other. You've got the wild and the natural, and they are just right up against the hotel and the park accommodations. It's like the civilization is trying to push out the wild, but then you've got the animals are like right there, like just right up at the porch of the park hotel, and they're just like pushing back. And it's the East versus the West. It's the educated versus the uneducated. And this is especially evident when you have the interactions between the driver for the expedition and the scientists and more educated and wealthy people. And that there's just such a huge contrast there. But the driver, he has his own knowledge, right? So he has the own knowledge of living in Montana and knowing the weather and the conditions in the backcountry. So he has a different kind of knowledge, but it really clashes with the scientists and these civilized people. There's science and romance, and I don't, of course, mean romance as romantic love, but the romance of the natural world and being moved by it. You know, that you're not just looking at a plant as a specimen, but truly appreciating the beauty and the miracle of a flower. So there's that, and there's financial independence and financial insecurity. Professor Merriam is just so weighed down. With the funding for this project, is a constant worry for him, and the expedition is almost from the beginning doomed. But fortunately, Alex is financially independent. And all these people, Miss Swinger really comes and swoops in and brings a tent, brings all these supplies so that Alex is able to be part of the expedition. And so that's great. And then we've got all these different worldviews that are in conflict with each other. There's the worldviews from the Native Americans and the worldviews from Alex and Professor Merriam, and everyone's approaching things differently. So that's also really interesting. What you're supposed to do, what you want to do, what can you do realistically. It's just very interesting. Amateur versus academic. Mrs. Eversman, she thinks that what she's doing isn't important, but she has come to know this family of birds, and she has learned like every behavior of them. It's amazing. And Alex says, if that's not science, I don't know what is. To devote hours and hours watching this one family of birds and in writing down every observation and everything you have learned. That really challenges Alex's ideas about the academic world and science. Of course, there's the male versus female, primitive and modern. There's also this whole capitalist and environmentalist conundrum, I guess. And because we've got the train, the railroad wants to come in and just create this whole system, and we've got, I think it's Captain Craighead, he's with the cavalry and oversees the park, and so they just want to have this big capitalist venture in the park. And finally, Captain Craighead is just trying to fight this because he appreciates the park, the natural wonders, and you're never quite sure, like, what's going to happen? Is this park going to fall? Are we going to have a railroad right through this and all these branches of railroad? And then there's even respect and disrespect in this book. Who deserves respect? It's just really interesting, all these things. And then it's not that any view is right or wrong in the book. It's just all these experiences in different walks of life that are pulling and against each other, pulling and pushing. So very interesting. And Alex talks about her train trip west. And during this train trip, she has observed that there are all these plants that are growing and thriving along the train tracks. And she writes home and just says, oh, it seems like they have developed a symbiotic relationship with the train and the railroad. And they're just thriving here, and isn't that interesting? And it is really what we do see playing out in the book, especially towards the end. A tragedy strikes the expedition, and we see ultimately that the park, the expedition, and even Alex are all saved. And it's just really interesting that everyone's humanity comes through at the end. And it's just wonderful. I don't know, I think that's my talk. I know I just rambled, but I would love to, if you have any questions about it. It's a little short, but ask away. Yes?
Is this historical fiction? Were there expeditions like this?
I'm sure there were. It is fiction. So, Yellowstone is still a place where science is happening, right? So there's always been science happening. I guess I was part of an expedition, but this is fictional. Yep. But yes, it is a place of science.
When was the book written?
This was, let me see, it's been a while. 1999. Oh, so just after I was there. Yeah. And Diane Smith she is an environmentalist.
What's the time frame? The first letter you read was what, 1898?
Yes, it is just that summer of 1898. Yeah.
And how did you get to go on the expedition like those extra people that were not scientists? Anybody could?
So they were these people or me?
Oh, those
these people. They were just like Mrs. Eversman, and she was just doing her own thing in the backcountry, but Alex would just happen upon her sometimes when she was out collecting specimens. And I think at one point she saw the shelter, the bird shelter, and Mrs. Eversman stuck her hand out and beckoned her in. All the people in the park, they're all just moving around. There was a lot of freedom that people could just go. They just went wherever they went and did whatever they wanted to. It wasn't the kind of experience like you would have now where there's certain trails to go on, everything's designated, but it was just, here's all this land and this is the national park, and people arrived and then they just went out for the day and did what they were there for, whether they were there to go soak and become prunes in the hot springs, or there was a count who was visiting and he was just on this big shooting expedition for his collections. There was John Willow, the poet, but people were really interested in this expedition, in the novel, and they were interested in Alex because when she first got to the park, she stayed at the hotel because she didn't have accommodations in the camp. And so people started getting to know her and were interested, and she's likable. And so then this idea of Alex on this expedition just kept drawing people to the expedition who would accompany them for the day, or would just tag along in various ways, or would stop by after dinner or during dinner and have a campfire, or would invite the group for this or that, or picnic. So it was very social. Yeah. Anything else? Has anyone been to Yellowstone yourselves? Yeah, it's wonderful.
Have you been back?
Yes, I've been back twice, but I haven't been in 18 years. So I went with my husband, we did a cross-country trip, and then so I have 3 kids, and when the youngest was a month old, we did a cross-country trip to Yellowstone with my in-laws, and it was great because you know what? He was a month old and he couldn't crawl away, he couldn't go anywhere, so he was safe. Like the girls were 5 and 6, so they were safe because they were old enough to be sensible, and then Ian wasn't mobile. So but my in-laws were visiting, and they're from South Africa. And so my father-in-law, he had always dreamed of seeing Old Faithful, so we did this ridiculous, out and back 9-day trip with 7 of us in the minivan, and we camped, I can't believe it, and I had the bassinet without the stand, but in the tent, we had this huge tent, and the bassinet was there so that the baby wouldn't get smothered in all the sleeping bags. And we would set him in a little tiny camp chair and tie a blanket so that he could sit by the fire with us. So yes, I would love to go back. It's just such a special place. I just love it. I should go to other places too, but it's like this. I read this book every year and I keep wanting to just go back to Yellowstone, but like that, I'm always like, I gotta read new books. I gotta see new places, but this is like home for me. Yeah.
I was there last fall. My daughter lives in Montana, so I go there really often. And the crowds get getting bigger and bigger. But they manage it. It was the big hotels with the stores and the big shops, and then it's contained. So much of it is still very, very wild. I haven't seen even a quarter of it.
Oh, I know, it's enormous, and I didn't see all of it either.
And we went in September, which
it's the best
got rid
time.
of some of the crowds.
Yes, September is fabulous. Yeah.
So the idea of keeping development away has been pretty successful. Huge crowd.
Yep, and I think when I was there in the summer on the long trip, we had, so remember they had the forest fires there earlier I don't remember if it was late 80s or early 90s. It was before I was there.
Okay.
And so what was interesting about that was it was starting to grow up again and be like reforested. So there were a lot of baby pine trees, but we had quite a view because everything was short. So you could just see so far on some of these hills and mountains. And that was pretty neat, and there was all the charred stumps, and they were beautiful. The sun was glistening on them, and there were lots of stands of fireweed, which grows in places where there has been a forest fire. It likes that environment. So that was really interesting to see that, and I'm sure it would be just totally different, much more forested now in those areas.
It's amazing how quickly it recovers from
Yeah.
a fire. 'Cause
Yeah.
For next year, there's little.
Yeah, and it's of course always changing, yeah. Did you have a question or a
Well,
comment?
I went very early. I was working and went by myself. What I was amazed at is how free the people were with their kids near the hot springs.
Oh, yeah,
Like, thanks.
yeah,
Could you hold their hand or just
Yeah.
maybe let them touch it and see how hot it is so that they stay on the,
yeah,
but it was wonderful.
yeah, it is. It's interesting because it's,
Just amazing
right, it's
how
an
large it is.
active thermal place. And we were one time, we were way out somewhere, I don't even know where we were, just back country. And we were on this kind of hillside, and it was just barren. There was nothing growing. It was just sand and dirt and dry. And there were all these like little steam vents, and they were around all these vents were these like sulfur crystals. And we were whatever, just taking notes about what it was like. But I was very aware that like underneath me, I didn't know what was under my feet, under the ground. So there were areas you could tell where the animals had tracks that were very packed. And so we knew to stay on those tracks because that was firm ground. So you never really know. Am I standing on firm ground? Yeah. And of course, Alex also has in this book, she really wants to see a grizzly bear. And I don't know, just a little bit obsessed with this. And then she sees one and just is alarmed. And I also had wanted to see a bear, but the very first thing our group did when we arrived in Yellowstone was we went to the Mammoth Hot Springs, to the headquarters there, and we had bear safety training. And I said, oh, no one's been killed by a bear in 50 years or whatever it was, like a long time. And it took me the whole summer to realize, but if you got attacked by a bear, it would still really hurt. You know? And then one day towards the end of the summer, we saw some bear claw marks up on one of the trees, and they were really high. And then I thought, I really don't want to see a bear while I'm out in the field. And so we would sing while we were hiking, and there was a group of us, so everything was making noise. But interestingly, Joseph, the Indian, like when he would just be very quietly collecting specimens, he would hum and make some noise just so that other creatures would know that he was there and no one would be startled, like in Blueberries for Sal. Yeah, it's.
Did you see any mothers and fathers pushing their kids out towards the buffalo to get a picture?
Oh, no, fortunately. I did see people getting out of their car, but no.
I stood there and do you really want your kid to be attacked?
Yeah, I did have a close encounter accidentally with a buffalo when my husband and I went out. We were gonna go on a hike and it was right by the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is just a huge thermal spring. And the ground around it, in a lot of these springs, there's this red algae or like rust colored algae, and that thrives at a certain temperature. But this particular spring, it's maybe the size of this room or bigger, probably bigger. But as the spring gets deeper, the water's so clear, and so it goes from like this sort of green on the edge to this darker shades of blue, and then until it's like navy in the center, and it's just beautiful. And so my husband and I were hiking, and we were right by this spring, and this trail is just this narrow, dusty track, and right here is the spring. There's a few feet of ground, and then it's the spring. And then on the other side of the track, the hill goes up, and it's just got these like little pine trees. And we looked up, and there's a buffalo coming towards us on the track. And we're like, where are we gonna go? We can't scramble up, there's like nothing, we can't scramble up this hill, and the spring is right here. We stood behind like a dead tree that was this big. And we were like just waited quietly, and we saw this other hiker behind who was like taking one step at a time, and this buffalo was taking one step at a time, just plodding along, and it was huge, huge. And he stopped right in front of our little tree, and he swung his head, and he looked at us, and we held our breath, and just was like, please keep going, please keep going. And then he kept going, and we were very relieved. But we didn't do a very long hike that day because I was nervous after that. There was only 2 of us. Yeah. But it's a wonderful place if you get a chance to read the book and a chance to go to Yellowstone. I highly recommend both. So, thank you.
You're welcome.